Alright, I'm gonna make a video today. So let's talk about immigration. So, when you think United States, a big topic now is immigration. Now, of course, there are many aspects to this. Apologies if the borders aren't the best, but if it functions, it functions. Essentially, the way it works is the United States of America and other countries have borders. Now, the borders may not be like this because, well, I suck at drawing, but still the basic principle of borders existing has been there for a while. And so, with these borders, they must naturally enforce them. Kinda hard to have a border if you don't enforce it. So, what do? Well, simple. You take your borders and actually enforce them. To not do so is tantamount to pretending they don't exist. Yeah, this is a horrible drawing of the US. But just pretend this is right for 2 seconds so I can explain this. Now, regardless of whether people are coming from here or here, the same problem emerges. The total land, in whatever measurement you want to do, the land units is the same. It does not change, no matter how many people move from one place to another. If you were to carve up this area, it doesn't matter whether you have 100 people living there or 1 million people living there. It's still the same territory. So if the population goes up, but the land stays the same, then land value, because there's more competition, would go up as well. Now, this can be modified by things like, for example, skyscrapers and hotels. Because you're building up, you're able to minimize the effect that land area has on population density, because you're able to condense it into smaller territories. You can have 100 people living in a skyscraper, for example, instead of in a suburb, and thus you save territory. Should be noted, Hawaii and Alaska also exist. I'm not even going to try to draw Alaska, I'll just write Alaska up here, because I butchered the 48 states. I'm not butchering my own. I know that would end very poorly. But regardless, with immigration, this is the effect. Land value goes up, land stays the same, more competition, so people are less able to acquire land. Now, some immigration can be good. Absolutely. In fact, a lot of the immigrants who came out to the United States initially from Europe contributed greatly to this country. But there were several issues, even with those who did come from Europe. 1, cultural tensions, and 2, another important thing to acknowledge, previous rivalries. Because remember, Europe has its own history too, so does Africa, so does Latin America. Historical rivalries still exist, no matter where you're from. So what we would see, for example, is Irish immigrants facing off against English immigrants. Legitimately, some of this main gang activity that you learn about in past American history was these two trying to kill each other in the Americas because they did not like each other. Historical rivalry persisted. That's just how it went. And as you add in more groups, the state has to get firmer with stating, essentially, behave yourself. I do not care where you're from, but if you are going to live together in this country, you must all tolerate each other, accept basic principles, and not try to kill each other. The more diverse a state, the more a sense of unity is required to preserve itself. If everyone wants to divide themselves like this. Each person claiming their own little plot, saying, I am me, this is my culture, you want our own thing here, we're not going to integrate with you, and firmly disagree with each other. Well, then guess what? They're gonna form their own communities, those communities aren't gonna trust each other, and conflict will ensue. So what needs to happen is, essentially, everyone here agrees to shared rules, shared beliefs, to tolerate each other. Now, if we were to get rid of the state and allow free association, this would largely solve itself. But we are not living with free association and instead a state. So, as a direct result, we must factor that in. Because think about it. If Mexico fails to run itself appropriately, we, as its neighbor, take on some of that burden. Because we have to deal with the consequences of that. Europe faced a similar thing with Syria. Syria gets into civil war, a lot of people flee because the Syrian government isn't exactly running things very well, and so now Europe has to deal with a migrant crisis. All because Syria couldn't do things properly. And so that's a big problem. Especially with migrants fleeing for asylum. What you essentially see is we get people for others' incompetence, which is not a good thing. Because fundamentally, now the US has to pick up a burden and manage it, do all this, invest a lot in it, deal with the higher land values to make sure everything works, all while another is basically razing itself to the ground and people are suffering. Legitimately, it is more efficient if instead of dealing with this, observe, this is now Central America. Why? Because I say it. And because I suck at drawing, so I'm just going to go with this. So I don't butcher El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, Nicaragua, and Costa Rica too much. This is now Central America. Also, Belize is here. This is Belize. They're in the corner. If these guys fail at their jobs and we have to pick up the slack, that's not good for us. It is much more efficient to solve the problem here. Same with Venezuela. We're getting a lot of Venezuelan migrants. Better to fix Venezuela and send the people back than deal with it here, because that way we're not just dealing with our land anymore. We're spreading it out among all of Central America, Venezuela, Mexico, Peru, Bolivia, Argentina, Chile, Brazil, Paraguay, Uruguay. Not Uruguay. Uruguay, there we go. All of those countries which are struggling. Some to a lesser extent when we deal with less migrants from them, but all who have their own struggles. If we can solve their problems there, their people won't try to go to here, but will still make the money from trading with them because they have more stable economies down there then. As a result, we secure our southern flank. We don't have to deal with increasing land values because we're spreading out the population among their lands as well. At least we won't see the values rising as much. And also, we get good allies, good money, long-term stability, hemisphere defense, basically everything we want. I'm still fine with immigration, to some extent. Definitely a lot of things need to be adjusted. It's not just illegal immigration that's a problem. Too much immigration is a very flawed situation, and one that cannot last. But if we instead focus on developing the countries where the immigrants are coming from and encouraging them to go back, help contribute to their original countries so that they can, still enjoy their culture and all that nonsense, while we make sure that they're stable enough so that we don't have to deal with them going kaput anytime soon, and the whole raising prices thing, then that's better for us. Immigrants can contribute. 100% they can. But we must weigh the reality of too many people coming here. We only have so much land. Land is one of the hardest things to create. Can it be done? Yeah, ask the Dutch. It can be used. recovered and integrated. But there are limits to it, and doing so requires removing some water from our planet, or at the very least, liquid water in the form of an ocean. After all, if there's a giant land reclamation to make all of Hawaii one thing, yeah, that's gonna cost a lot of water. And so, naturally, what ends up happening is land is one of the most scarce resources that we have in terms of what we can extract. So we have to play a lot more carefully. The idea of just letting everyone in is a very poor choice. We have to balance our interests, their own, and their countries, along with our own countries. And generally, I'd advise letting some people come in, yes, but a limited amount. And when we see a lot of people coming from one country, like say Venezuela, or the previous one was Mexico, Central America was also a big area. It's better to fix their countries, solve their problems so they don't want to go here when we can't afford to deal with a lot of them, than just to say send them back, or to say let them in. We can't really afford that. It's a war of attrition. But if we can solve the problem, get good people in charge there, in those countries, fixing their problems, setting their economies on track, making sure things work well, well then that's perfectly fine. It works. And indeed, it contributes to our diplomatic position. And that's what we should do. We must have limits to immigration, 100%, just because we can't sustain this long term. But at the same time, we must work to ensure that these people actually get something, because otherwise they're just going to keep doing it again and again and again. And that's just expensive. So it's better to send them back, make sure our border's secure, and then start fixing their country so they don't want to come over here. That is the best solution. That'll be all. Thank you for watching. Apologies if this is rather short.